One more problem to do. Today's topic has been distance is equal to rate times time. As I said earlier, very common problems, ACT, PSAT, SAT, GMAT, all these standardized tests for the same reasons I mentioned earlier for people who are just tuning in. It requires a number of different things. Each of these tests are asking you to solve problems that require a number of different skills. You may have learned this skill in algebra. The specific technique, you might have learned it in algebra. You might have learned another technique a year later in your geometry class. So what these problems require you to do, these problems require you to take that subject that you learned in algebra, take another topic you learned in geometry, it'll mesh those topics together in the context of one problem and then offer it. This is why you need to study before you take these tests. You need to study these things so that you can recall, at a moment's notice, you can recall these topics that you may have discussed a year later, a year before, 2 years before. Those topics have to be available. Your understanding of those topics have to be available to you at a moment's notice. So you read it, you say, oh, that's a distance equal to rate times time problem. Well, the only way you can do that is just have studied before you take the test. All right, so long-winded, I know. Let's look at this last problem. Let's do the best we can. We only have another couple minutes. Let's see how we do on this last problem. All right, let's take a look. All righty, so what we have this cargo plane left Singapore an hour before the Air Force plane. It says the planes flew in opposite directions. Let's draw a very good diagram. Very good diagram. Very good diagram. And a cargo plane left Singapore. This is Singapore. So let's call this C for cargo. And let's call this A for Air Force. All right, so distance equal to rate times time. For both the Air Force plane and the cargo plane, D is equal to RT. The planes flew in opposite directions. We've acknowledged that sentence. We've got a good diagram. Everything I've asked you to do, we're doing. The Air Force plane flew at 290 kilometers per hour for 10 hours. All right, so let's substitute in there. We've got 290 kilometers per hour for 10 hours. Substitute 10 hours there. Hours cancel. You left with 2,900 miles. 2,900 miles. That was the distance that the Air Force plane traveled. After this same 10 hours, the planes were 6,040 kilometers apart. So let's identify that. All right, so it's been traveling 10 hours that way, 10 hours that way. The distance was 6,640 kilometers. All right. So what we want you to be able to see here is that if this distance was 2,900, excuse me, this distance was 2,900, and then this distance, it says after 10 hours, the trains were 6,640 kilometers apart. Hopefully you can see that if you want the distance that the cargo plane traveled, you would just simply subtract. And I did that before the show. 6,640, you subtract 2,900, you get a distance of 3,740. A distance of 3,740 miles. 3,740 miles, is equal to rate times time. They gave you the time. They gave you the time because they said that the planes, they said that the Air Force, I'm sorry, it's cut off. They said the Air Force plane flew at 290 kilometers per hour for 10 hours. After this same time, which the time was 10 hours. So you're going to substitute in 10 for time. 10 hours. And they say what was the cargo plane speed? Another word for speed is rate. So now you're going to end up with a basic algebraic equation. You end up with 3,740 is equal to rate times 10. Basic algebraic equation. You divide by what's next to what you're solving for. Divide by 10 on both sides. And what you end up with is, the 10s cancel, you'll end up with rate is 374 kilometers per hour. Final answer. Final answer. All right.